Tonight, we step beside the 1900s Dublin toll weighman at a damp roadside scale where cartwheels shine in the lamplight. There is no hurry here, only the slow rhythm of weight, coin, hoof, and breath. The morning has not quite opened, and the air carries that soft Dublin chill that settles under a collar before sunrise. You can smell wet stone, horse sweat, old timber, and the faint iron tang of the weighing plate. We stand with him by the little toll house, where a small fire keeps one corner warm, and a ledger waits beneath a careful hand. The toll weighman of 1900s Dublin is not a grand figure in memory, and perhaps that is part of his quietness. He belongs to thresholds, to places people pass through while thinking of other things. A carter wants the road ahead, a shopkeeper wants the load delivered, and a farmer wants the market reached before the best buyers drift away. But you and I will stay here a while, beside the scale, and notice the work that others barely saw. The weighbridge lies level with the road, its iron surface dark from rain and use. When a loaded cart rolls onto it, the boards creak, the rims grind, and the horse lowers its head as if it knows the pause by habit. The weighman listens before he looks, because every trade teaches its own small wisdom. You begin to hear whether a load is coal, flour, stone, timber, or barrels, just from the way it settles. Inside the toll house, the room is plain and close. There is a stool, a narrow desk, a hook for a coat, and perhaps a shelf with a mug gone brown around the rim. The window is small, because the work needs watching more than comfort, and it frames the road like a slow-moving picture. You can feel the day gathering there, one cart at a time, each one bringing its own smell and weather. A toll weighman did not merely glance and wave people through. He checked what passed, measured what needed measuring, and helped turn traffic into numbers that a city could understand. The load might decide a fee, settle a dispute, or prove that a cart had not been overburdened beyond reason. In the 1900s, Dublin still moved much of its daily life by horse and cart, and the weighman stood where that movement became orderly. He kept a ledger, and the ledger kept him. Names, loads, charges, times, and marks all passed beneath his pen in a steady line. The ink might thicken in the cold, and his fingers might ache before noon, yet the writing had to stay clear. You can imagine the nib touching paper, lifting, returning, while outside another wheel splashes through a shallow rut. Few remember him because his work left little theatre behind. There were no bright uniforms for postcards, no great machines throwing sparks, no heroic tale easy to repeat. He was part of the ordinary machinery of the city, as necessary as a latch or hinge, and just as easily forgotten once the door had opened. We remember the market, the bridge, the cart, and the goods, but not always the person who weighed them. Still, if you stand here long enough, the quiet importance of the role begins to show. A city depends on small agreements, and weight is one of the oldest agreements of all. A sack of meal, a load of coal, a barrel of porter, a cart of stone, each becomes fairer when someone patient writes it down. The toll weighman's world is made of such fairness, modest and repetitive, measured in pounds, shillings, and damp pages. By the first pale hour, the road has begun to sound more often beneath the wheels, and we move with him into the gentle beginning of the working day. The first arrivals are usually practical people, wrapped against the damp, speaking little because morning has not loosened them yet. A cart comes from the edge of the city with turf or coal, and the horse's breath lifts white in the cool air. You stand near the doorway and feel the grit under your boots, while the toll weighman of 1900s Dublin steps out with his coat pulled close. He knows this hour by its smell, smoke and mud and harness leather. The process is simple when seen from afar, though it asks for patience close up. The cart rolls onto the plate, the driver waits, and the weighman checks the mechanism or reading with a steady eye. Some weighbridges used levers and balance arms, others dials, and each had its own temperament after years of rain, frost, and jolting wheels. You learn to trust the scale, but you also learn to listen when it complains. The horse shifts its weight, and the load answers with a dull settling sound. If the cart carries coal, fine black dust lies in the seams of the boards and marks the driver's cuffs. If it carries flour, there may be pale powder on the sacks, soft as breath against the fingers. The weighman notes the difference because work like this is never only numbers, it is texture, smell, and long acquaintance. He may ask where the cart has come from, or where it is bound, though often he already knows. Regular drivers become part of the morning furniture. There is the man who always coughs before speaking, the woman who sits straight beside a basketed load, the boy who brings messages from a yard near the river. You notice how the weighman greets them without fuss, making space for human habit inside official routine. Coins pass from hand to hand when a fee is due. They are cold at first, then warm briefly in the palm, and they make a small, final sound when dropped into a drawer or tin. The toll itself is not grand enough to be remembered by song, but it matters to the accounts. The weighman counts carefully, because a small error repeated all day becomes a troublesome thing by evening. There is a particular quiet in watching someone do a familiar task well. The body moves before the mind needs to announce each step. Coat sleeve, ledger, pen, glance, scale, fee, nod, next cart. You feel the comfort of that order, and perhaps your own breathing begins to follow it. Slower than the road, steadier than the morning bells. Dublin wakes around him in layers. Farther off, a church bell marks the hour with a sound softened by mist. Somewhere a door is bolted open, and somewhere a milk cart rattles past without stopping. The weighman remains at his small station, neither fully inside nor outside, holding the edge between movement and record. He is a quiet keeper of passage, and as the morning grows lighter over the wet stones, the work changes from first arrivals to the fuller traffic of the city. The fuller traffic arrives with a firmer sound, as if the city has remembered its own weight and begun to lean toward the markets, the quays, and the narrow streets beyond. You hear the iron hoops of cartwheels striking stones with a hollow clatter, and beneath it the softer slap of hooves on wet patches where last night's rain has settled. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman stands just outside his doorway, watching the road become a slow queue. His coat smells faintly of smoke from the little fire, and the damp has already found the cuffs of his sleeves. By now the drivers are more awake, and their voices carry farther in the morning air. One man calls ahead to ask whether the scale is clear, while another eases his horse with a low word and a hand on the leather trace. You stand close enough to hear harness buckles tapping against brass rings, and close enough to smell oats in a feed bag under the seat. The weighman raises one hand, not sharply, only enough to set the pace. Everyone here understands that the road must move, but it must move in order. The weighbridge has its own kind of patience. It receives each cart without complaint, whether the load is honest and balanced, or heaped too high under a tarpaulin dark with rain. The iron plate is worn smooth in the middle, and along its edges, old mud has dried in ridges like dark bread crust. You watch the wheels climb onto it, pause, settle, and stop. That moment of stillness, after all the creaking movement, is when the Dublin toll weighman's day becomes exact. He looks at the gauge, or the balance, or the marked arm, depending on the equipment at that particular toll point. He knows how the pointer trembles when a horse shifts too much, and he knows when to wait for the load to rest fully. A rushed reading is no kindness to anyone, because the fee must be right and the record must make sense later. So we wait with him, breathing in the smells of wet rope, coal dust, old straw, and morning smoke, until the measure steadies. There is a quiet dignity in how little drama the task allows. The weighman does not argue unless he must. He does not hurry the animal, nor flatter the driver, nor turn the roadside into a stage for authority. He simply asks for the cart to stand square, checks the figure, and lowers his eyes to the ledger. You can feel how the work narrows the world into a few plain things: weight, name, load, coin, road. The ledger page has a texture of its own, especially after weeks in a toll house where damp creeps through walls and settles into paper. When the weighman turns a page, it may lift reluctantly, as if it has grown used to lying still. His handwriting must remain steady through cold fingers and roadside interruptions. You see him blot the ink with care, because a smeared figure can bring trouble later, and because neatness is one of the few comforts a man can keep inside repetitive work. A driver bringing stone for a building yard may know the weighman by face, but not by story. That is one reason so few remember the 1900s Dublin toll Weighman now. He stood in plain sight, but at the edge of other people's business, appearing only as a pause before the real purpose of the journey. The stone would become a wall, the coal would become heat, the flour would become bread, and the record of weighing would sleep in a municipal bundle until even the name seemed small. Still, in the living hour, the work is not small. A city needs someone to stand where fairness can be checked with iron and ink. The carter wants to show he is not carrying more than declared, the buyer wants confidence, and the authority wants roads and dues accounted for. You can feel the old balance of trust there, not romantic or grand, just practical. The weighman keeps that balance by showing up, morning after morning, in weather that rarely makes itself convenient. The toll house window gathers beads of moisture along the lower pane. Inside, the air smells of ash, damp wool, sealing wax, and the faint sourness of yesterday's tea left too long in a cup. The fire does not warm the whole room, but it changes the feel of returning to it after standing outside. You step in with him between carts, and for a moment, the noise of the road is muffled. The pencil marks, stacked coins, folded notices, and worn stool form a private world only a few feet from public traffic. He may have a small meal wrapped in cloth, perhaps bread, butter, a bit of cold meat, or whatever can be eaten in short intervals without ceremony. The job does not invite a proper table, and the day does not always pause when hunger arrives. You imagine him taking a bite while watching through the glass, chewing slowly as a loaded cart approaches from the left. Even rest becomes part of the rhythm, fitted between the creak of wheels and the scratching of the pen. We can think of the toll weighman as a man of interruptions, though not in a harsh way. His morning is made of tasks broken apart and resumed again. He warms his hands, then hears a wheel. He adds a column, then answers a driver. He lifts a mug, then sets it down because the scale is needed. In such work, patience is not a feeling but a skill, learned in the body until it becomes almost invisible. The road near him holds signs of many trades. A scrap of sacking clings to a nail on a cart side. A smear of lime shows where a load was shifted, and a dark trickle from a coal cart mixes with rainwater in the gutter. You start to read these marks as the Dublin toll weighman might read them. The city is not one thing here. It is grain, timber, iron, turf, porter, milk, stone, vegetables, and the daily labor of carrying them from one place to another. A small disagreement may arise over a reading, but even that stays low and practical in this sleepy telling. The driver thinks the load cannot be so heavy because he loaded it himself before dawn, and the weighman invites him to settle the horse and look again. The scale is checked, the cart rests, and the number stands or softens by a little. You hear no grand quarrel, only the muted roughness of working men guarding their pennies. The toll weighman's calm is part of the apparatus. He has likely learned which voices rise from fatigue and which rise from mischief. He has learned that hunger sharpens a complaint, and rain makes everyone less patient than they meant to be. So he gives a little room where he can, without surrendering the record. We stand beside him and feel how that too is labor. Not heavy like lifting sacks, perhaps, but steady as holding a gate open against a persistent wind. The morning broadens, and with it comes more smell from the city. Bakers' ovens breathe out warm yeast into side streets. Coal smoke lies low under the eaves, and horses carry the strong mixed scent of sweat, hay, and wet hide. Somewhere near enough to hear, a cartman laughs through his nose at some small remark. The sound passes quickly, but it brightens the toll point for a moment. Then the next load rolls forward, and the routine gathers itself again. For the 1900s Dublin toll weighman, each cart is both familiar and new. The kind of load may be common, but the exact weight belongs only to this morning, this weather, this driver, this wheel. He enters each one as if small differences matter, because in his trade they do. You can feel the comfort of that attention. It gives the day a quiet grain, like wood rubbed smooth by many hands. And as the market hour draws nearer, the toll point becomes less a lonely roadside station and more a listening post for the whole working city. You hear the market before you see its produce clearly. There is the clatter of crates, the squeak of a wheel needing grease, the sharp call of someone asking for room, and under it all the hooves, steady and patient. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman knows this portion of the day well. When carts bring vegetables, barrels, sacks, and small mixed loads that smell of earth and storage, we stand near the scale as the air grows livelier, though never hurried in our telling. The road is awake now, but it still has to pass one cart at a time. A vegetable cart may arrive with soil still clinging to the roots. You can smell turnips, cabbage leaves, damp straw, and the clean mineral scent of clay that has not been long from a field. The driver sits hunched, collar up, boots marked with the same earth as the load. The weighman notes what he needs to note, neither prying nor careless. You sense how the city's breakfast, dinner, and supper all pass through such hands before anyone calls them by those names. The scale does not care whether a load is humble or costly. It receives a cart of cabbages with the same flat attention it gives to barrels or stone. That impartiality is part of its usefulness, and the weighman borrows some of that character for himself. He does not need to admire the goods, only to measure them, yet he is human, and after years at the road, he knows the season by scent before he reads it in any book. In spring, there is more wet green and softer mud. In summer, the carts smell warmer, with fruit turning sweet under cloth and dust rising from the road. In autumn, the loads grow heavier with roots, fuel, and provisions for darker months. In winter, everything seems to carry a rim of cold metal. You can imagine the weighman marking time through these changes, not with poetry spoken aloud, but with the simple knowledge of his nose and hands. The Dublin toll weighman's position sits between private trade and public account. A seller may think in baskets and bargains, a buyer in price and quality, while the city thinks in fees, road wear, and regulation. The weighman brings these worlds into brief contact. He checks, records, and lets the cart go on. It is modest work, but modest work often holds more of daily life than a grand office ever sees. He may know which farmers start too late and arrive flustered, and which old carters never need a reminder to set the wheels straight. He may recognize a horse's white blaze before he recognizes the driver's hat. You stand with him and begin to feel the tenderness of repeated noticing. People who pass through every week become part of the weather of the place, and their absences are felt even if nobody names them. A woman bringing goods toward market may keep her coins tied in a corner of cloth. When she pays, she unties the knot with fingers roughened by cold water and field work. The coins click against the weighman's palm, and he gives her the receipt or mark required by the rules of that place. We notice the small courtesy in his nod and the smaller courtesy in her waiting without complaint. Nothing large happens, but the morning is held together by such exchanges. Why few remember the toll weighman becomes easier to understand here. He stood at the edge of transactions without being their owner. He was not the farmer, not the merchant, not the purchaser, not the city official whose name appeared in minutes and reports. He was the working hand of a system, present every day and missing from most stories. You can feel how easily history lets such people fade, even while depending on them for its ordinary shape. But if memory is quiet, the work itself was not empty. It asked for early rising, careful figures, tolerance of weather, and an eye for both people and equipment. The weighman had to keep the flow moving without losing accuracy. He had to be visible enough to be respected, and ordinary enough to be approached. In a city like Dublin, where streets, quays, and markets fed one another through countless small movements, that balance mattered. The scale may need attention between rushes. Mud must be cleared from the edges, because packed dirt can interfere with the proper settling of the plate. A hinge may need oil, and a chain may need checking for slack. The weighman bends to inspect what most people roll over without seeing. You can smell the oil as he applies it, dark and faintly bitter, and you can hear the small relief of metal moving more freely afterward. His hands are not clean in the delicate sense, though they are careful hands. Ink stains one finger, coal dust may mark the cuff, and oil leaves a dark crescent near the nail. When he wipes them on a rag, the rag carries the whole morning in layers. We see that and understand something of the job. It belongs to paperwork and road dirt equally, which may be why it slips between categories when people later try to remember the past. The market traffic tests the weighman's sense of pace. If he moves too slowly, irritation gathers behind the stopped cart, and horses grow restless in their traces. If he moves too quickly, mistakes creep into the ledger, and mistakes take longer to mend than patience would have taken in the first place. You feel the middle rhythm he chooses. It is not leisurely, exactly, but it is unflustered, like a practiced hand smoothing a wrinkled page. There may be children nearby, sent on errands, lingering because any official process has a small magnetism to young eyes. They watch the cart roll onto the scale, then look toward the weighman's face for signs of mystery. But the mystery is mostly steadiness, and children often prefer something brighter. Years later, they may remember the horse, the smell of fruit, or the puddle beside the road, while the toll weighman remains only a blurred figure in a dark coat. We, though, are staying with him. We are letting the blurred figure come gently back into focus. We see how his boots take on a pale rim of dried mud. We notice how he keeps one corner of the ledger weighted so the damp page does not curl. We hear the pencil being sharpened with a small knife, the shaving falling soft onto the desk like a thin curl of bark. A load of barrels brings a different music. The hoops knock softly when the cart rolls, and the wood gives off a cellar smell, damp and deep and faintly sour. If the barrels hold beer or porter, the air around them feels heavier somehow, warmed by malt even in cool weather. The Dublin toll weighman does not need to dwell on their contents, yet he knows their handling. Barrels shift if badly wedged, and a shifting load can unsettle a reading. He asks the driver to hold steady. The horse flicks an ear. Somewhere behind, a man coughs, and the sound seems to hang briefly in the moist air. The weighman waits for the last small movement of the cart to fade. Only then does he take the measure. You can feel how waiting becomes a kind of respect, not for ceremony, but for the truth of weight itself. By late morning, the light has climbed high enough to show the toll house plainly, with its worn threshold and smoke-darkened upper corner. The road no longer feels secret or blue with dawn. It is brown, grey, and silver, marked by wheels and shining where puddles catch the sky. The weighman's face may show the beginning of tiredness around the eyes. Still, his movements remain even, because the work has several hours yet to unfold. And when the first rush of market traffic begins to thin, the day settles into a quieter stretch of maintenance, accounting, and watchfulness. This quieter stretch is not rest, though it may look like rest to someone passing quickly. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman returns to the desk, draws the ledger closer, and begins to bring the morning into order. You sit with him in the small toll house, where the fire has dropped low and the air feels close with paper, wool, and wet leather. Outside, the road continues, but the sound is less crowded now. There is space between carts, and space changes the nature of work. He adds figures carefully, perhaps with lips moving just enough to keep the column steady in his mind. Inked entries become totals, totals become proof, and proof becomes the quiet backbone of the office that may inspect the books later. We can imagine a municipal clerk, somewhere else, reading these marks without knowing the cold morning that made them. The weighman knows better. Each line is a cart, a voice, a horse, a wheel, and a pause on iron. The desk may have grooves worn into it by years of elbows and pen strokes. A small drawer sticks when pulled, because damp wood swells in Dublin weather. In it lie coins, receipts, spare nibs, a stub of pencil, and perhaps a folded notice about revised charges or procedures. You feel the slight resistance of the drawer, the scrape as it opens, the smell of old paper rising from inside. Such objects make a workplace intimate without ever being decorative. The toll weighman's day depends on trust in little systems. The scale must be true, the clock close enough, the ledger legible, and the coins counted twice when attention has been broken. If one part slips, the rest becomes troublesome, so he develops habits that seem almost ceremonial. He taps the stack of papers square, wipes the nib, checks the drawer, glances at the road, and returns to the column. No one builds statues to such habits. That is another reason few remember the Dublin toll weighman. History often favors events that can be named, dated, and retold with a bright edge, while routine work spreads itself thinly across thousands of mornings. Yet ordinary civic life depends on repeated accuracy, and repeated accuracy depends on someone willing to be careful when nobody is admiring the care. We sit close enough to admire it softly, without disturbing it. Outside, a gull may call from the direction of the river, its cry thinned by distance and soot-colored air. Dublin's working world is never far from water, even where the toll point stands inland from the quays. Goods move from ships to carts, from warehouses to shops, from farms to streets, and each movement leaves traces in the Weighman's record. You can smell the river in certain winds, brackish and cold, folded into the stronger scents of horses and smoke. A cart of timber comes through during this quieter hour. The wood is stacked in long lengths, the cut ends pale against the darker bark, and it gives off a clean resin smell when the air is damp. The driver's hands are rough from rope, and his coat has sawdust caught near the pocket seam. The weighman guides him onto the plate with a small motion. We watch the load settle, and the timber creaks as if remembering the tree it used to be. The reading is taken, the number written, the fee settled. Then the cart moves on, carrying rafters, repairs, shelving, or fuel towards some place we will not see. The toll weighman remains, and that staying is central to the job. Others pass through with purpose, but he holds the fixed point. You feel the stillness that comes from being the person who does not go on, at least not until the shift is finished, and the road has given up its accounts. During a lull, he may step outside to stretch his back. The air feels fresher after the close room, though it is still threaded with smoke and stable smell. He looks along the road in both directions, not dramatically, just as someone checks the horizon of his own small kingdom. You stand beside him and notice the sound of water dripping from a roof edge into a shallow barrel. Each drop is small, but together they make a steady companion. A toll point in 1900s Dublin would have been part of older patterns of movement, some inherited from turnpike habits and local charging systems, others adapted to newer municipal needs. The exact arrangements varied by place, and the weighman's concern was usually not the grand structure, but the working rule in front of him. What must be weighed? What must be paid? What must be entered? And who must be allowed onward? You and I need not hurry through that. The job lives in the rule becoming hand movement. He may carry a watch, or rely on a clock in the toll house, though either could be a little contrary. Time at the scale is not only clock time. It is the time between carts, the time a horse needs to stand, the time ink needs to dry before a page turns. You can feel those older measures of time around him, slower and more bodily than the strict minute. They suit a sleep-bound story, because they ask nothing sudden of us. There is often a kettle somewhere in such a workplace, blackened underneath, and plain in shape. When water warms, it gives a small sound before boiling, a hush and tick against metal. Tea may be strong, dark, and taken quickly. The cup warms his fingers, and for a moment, the weighman's attention rests on heat rather than numbers. We notice that comfort because it is not ornamental. It is the kind of comfort that lets a person continue. The road outside receives another cart, this one lighter, perhaps returning after delivery. An empty cart has a different voice. It rattles more, complains more, and reveals loose joints hidden by a heavy load. The weighman may still need to note it, depending on the local rule, or he may simply recognize the driver and let the road take him. You hear the hollow clack of boards and feel how absence has a sound of its own. This is part of the weighman's knowledge too. Weight is not merely heaviness. It is the difference between going in and coming out, between full and empty, between what is declared and what is found. A city's movement can be understood through these differences, though the man making the entries may never speak of it that way. He simply does the next necessary thing. That simplicity is one of the reasons the work feels so calm when we slow down enough to see it. If a supervisor or official appears, the air may tighten slightly, but not sharply. The ledger is available, the coins accounted for, the scale in working order. The weighman's competence is shown by there being little to say. A page is turned, a few entries checked, a question asked about morning traffic, and then the official moves on. You sense how many working lives are measured by the absence of complaint rather than the presence of praise. When he is alone again, the room seems to exhale. He may shift the stool, rub one wrist, and look at the fire as though considering whether it deserves another small piece of coal. The coal scuttle has a dry black smell, and the pieces click softly against one another when moved. He feeds the fire just enough. A toll house does not invite extravagance, but a little warmth keeps the ink and fingers from becoming stubborn. The Dublin toll weighman is not separate from the city's larger changes, though his day may feel ancient in its repetitions. Around him, motor vehicles are beginning to become less rare, and new systems will slowly alter roads, charges, and the need for certain kinds of roadside measurement. But in this hour, the horse cart still rules the soundscape. The future is not loud here. It is only a faint difference in the distance, while the scale remains in use beneath the present wheels. We stay with the present because that is where sleep finds its footing. The pen rests, the road sounds, the weighman looks up, and another ordinary exchange begins. A man delivering sacks of meal speaks with a flowery softness, as though the load has quieted even his voice. The sacks are heavy and rounded, tied at the mouth with cord. You can smell grain dust when the cart stops, pale and dry against the damp air. The weighman watches for balance, because sacks can settle unevenly. He may ask the driver to shift nothing, only to hold still, and the horse stamps once with a muted thud. The reading steadies, the number is entered. A small dusting of flour remains on the edge of the cart, and when the vehicle moves on, the air keeps its scent for a few breaths. We breathe with it, slowly, while the ledger gains another line. And as noon approaches, the road's appetite changes again, drawing the weighman toward the middle part of the day, when hunger, fatigue, and habit all sit beside him. By noon, the light has lost its early softness, but the damp remains tucked into corners. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman feels the morning in his shoulders, in the small of his back, and in the fingers that have held the pen too long. You feel it with him, not as hardship sharpened for drama, but as the ordinary ache of staying at a post. The toll house smells more lived in now. Tea, ash, damp cloth, ink, coins, and road dust have become one familiar air. He eats when he can. Perhaps he unwraps bread that has gone a little firm at the edges, with butter pressed thin and uneven across it. Perhaps there is cheese, or a slice of cold bacon, or nothing more than tea and whatever was left from breakfast. We sit quietly while he takes this small meal, listening for wheels even as he chews. In work like this, the body learns to rest without fully letting go. A cart may arrive just as he has begun. That is the nature of roadside employment. He folds the cloth over the food, sets it where dust will not fall too freely, and steps back out. The driver may apologize, or may not notice the interruption at all. The weighman gives no sign of injury. You can feel the discipline of ordinary service in that simple movement, leaving one's bread for the road because the road has called. The noon traffic is mixed. Some carts are late to market, some are leaving after a sale, and some belong to trades that keep their own rhythms apart from food and morning business. A load of bricks brings a dry, earthy smell under the damp, each brick red or brown with chipped corners and powdery edges. The cart sinks heavily onto the scale. The horse's sides move slowly, and the harness creaks under weight. The toll weighman checks the measure, then writes with the careful patience of someone who knows fatigue can make numbers slippery. You watch his hand slow slightly on the page. He may blot the entry twice, or run his eye along the line before moving on. Such care is not dramatic, but it is deeply human. When we are tired, we make small rituals to protect ourselves from error. The driver of the brick cart may carry a smell of clay, sweat, and pipe smoke. His boots are caked at the sole, and his sleeves show the reddish powder of handling. He pays, waits for the mark or receipt, and moves on toward a building site where other men will lift and lay each brick by hand. The weighman's role in that future wall is brief and nearly invisible, yet the wall, in its own quiet way, has passed across his scale. There is a great tenderness in noticing invisible links. A loaf begins with grain, a room begins with timber, a fire begins with coal, and a street repair begins with stone. The toll weighman touches none of these final forms, yet he stands where they move from one part of the city to another. We can let that thought remain soft, without making it too bright. It is enough to know that small stations belong to large patterns. A light rain begins, not heavy, only a fine stippling on the window and road. It darkens the horse's coat and makes the leather harness shine. The smell of wet dust rises first, then fades into the steadier scent of mud and wool. You hear drops tick against the toll house roof, and the sound lays itself beneath the work like a quiet accompaniment. The Dublin toll weighman pulls his collar closer and continues. Rain changes the road's mood. Drivers become more eager to move on. Paper must be shielded, and the scale's edges gather muck more quickly. The weighman keeps a rag near the desk and another for his hands, though neither stays clean for long. If a receipt is needed, he protects it under his palm until the driver can tuck it away. We notice the care in that gesture. Paper and rain are old adversaries. Inside the toll house, the fire gains importance. Its heat is uneven, warming one knee, one side of the desk, and the lower edge of the wall. Smoke may hesitate before finding the flue, leaving a faint sting in the eyes. The weighman knows how to adjust the draft, when to leave it alone, and when the weather will make it sulk no matter what he does. You can feel how a workplace becomes almost a companion through such negotiations. A man returning with empty crates stops to settle a previous question about a charge. The conversation is low, practical, and filled with references to times, loads, and markings. The weighman turns back through the ledger, page by page, the damp paper making a soft dragging sound. He finds the entry. A finger rests beside the line. The matter is clarified, and the man goes on with a nod that says more than thanks. These little disputes are part of why records mattered. Memory alone is not always fair, especially when money, weather, and fatigue blur the edges of a day. The ledger gives the weighman a second voice, calmer than conversation and harder to bend. You sit beside that book and feel its quiet authority. It does not speak loudly, but it remembers what people are too busy to hold. And yet the ledger remembers in a narrow way. It may preserve a name, a weight, and a payment, while leaving out the smell of rain, the horse's patient eyes, the driver's cracked knuckles, and the weighman's interrupted meal. That is how many quiet jobs vanish. They remain in figures, but not in feeling. So we are giving feeling back to the 1900s Dublin toll weighman, one slow detail at a time. The rain eases, and the road begins to shine rather than splash. Light gathers in wheel ruts, broken into small pieces by passing hooves. A cart carrying metal goods comes through with a sharper sound, clinking and knocking under a canvas cover. The smell is iron, oil, and damp cloth. The weighman watches it onto the plate, and the cart gives a little shiver as the load settles. You feel the difference from sacks or timber at once. He asks the driver what is carried, not from curiosity alone, but because proper description belongs with proper measure. The answer may be fittings, tools, rails, or scrap, each word placed into the day's account. Metal loads have their own gravity. They sit low, they speak sharply, and they seem to chill the air around them. The weighman records them with the same steady hand, though his fingers may now be stiff from rain. At midday, the city sounds thicker. There are more voices, more footsteps, more distant whistles, and the layered hum of work underway behind walls. You can hear a hammer from somewhere beyond the road, steady but faint. You can hear a dog bark once, then lose interest. The toll point remains a place of passing, but by now we understand that passing is not emptiness. It is the shape of the job. The weighman's own name, whatever it may be, is less remembered than the function he served. That can feel melancholy if we hold it too tightly, so we hold it gently instead. Many working people lived that way, known in their place, useful to their neighbors, and later absorbed into the larger, quieter fabric of the city. You may not know their names, but you know the feel of their labor when you pause beside a tool, a counter, a ledger, or a worn threshold. A small breeze moves through the doorway and lifts the edge of a paper. The weighman sets the inkwell on it without thinking. His hand has done this before. He glances at the road, then at the sky, judging whether the rain will return. We share that glance, not needing an answer. The day is not something he controls, it is something he tends. The afternoon will bring its own kinds of weight, less crowded than market morning, but deeper in fatigue, and as the noon hour loosens, we follow him into that slower labor. The first part of the afternoon often feels suspended, as if the city has taken one long breath after the morning's errands. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman sits with the ledger open and the fire low, while the road outside speaks in intervals. You hear a cart approach from far enough away that its sound arrives before its shape. Wheels over stone, a pause, a horse snorting softly, then the driver's voice near the scale. The day has not quieted, but it has spread out. Afternoon light lies differently on the toll house. It finds scratches on the desk that morning ignored, and it turns damp patches on the wall into dull, uneven maps. Dust hangs briefly where a sunbeam reaches through the small window. You see it move when the door opens, stirred by cold air and the smell of the road. The weighman may not notice the light as beauty, but he lives inside it all the same. A cart of coal comes through, and with it the whole air changes. Coal dust has a way of entering the seams of things, darkening cloth, settling in wrinkles, and leaving a dry taste at the back of the throat. The driver's face is marked around the eyes, and the sacks or loose loads sit dense and black under cover. You stand with the Dublin toll weighman as the cart mounts the weighbridge, heavy in a way the road seems to recognize. Coal is winter, cooking, washing water, factory heat and household comfort, all before it is flame. The weighman may think only of the measure, yet the load carries many future rooms within it. He waits for the horse to settle, reads the weight and enters the line. A smudge transfers from his finger to the page margin. The mark remains, a tiny shadow of the load itself. The driver pays with coins that leave a black trace when counted. Perhaps he jokes softly about the weather, because coalmen and weather are old acquaintances. Perhaps he says nothing, being tired from lifting and delivery. The weighman answers according to the mood, enough to be companionable, not enough to delay the next movement. You sense that he has learned the exact weight of conversation suitable to a toll point. That phrase could almost belong to his whole life at work, the weight of conversation. Too much talk slows the road, too little chills it. A greeting, a question, a nod, a mild remark about rain, and the human exchange is complete. We watch this balance with the same attention we give the scale. It is another measuring device, though no one has bolted it into the ground. Afternoon fatigue can make the body seek shortcuts. The weighman resists where accuracy is concerned. He may know a driver and load well enough to guess, but guessing is not the work. The work is to measure, record, and account, again and again. You can feel the steadiness required to repeat a task without allowing familiarity to hollow it out. This steadiness is quiet, but it is not small. Another cart arrives with hay or straw, high and lighter than it appears. It brings a dry, sweet smell that softens the coal still lingering in the air. The load rustles in the breeze, and a few loose strands drift down onto the wet edge of the road. The horse turns its head toward the scent, perhaps more interested than anyone else present. The weighman smiles only faintly if at all, but he notices. Hay loads can look immense while weighing less than their size suggests. That contrast belongs to the weighman's daily education. Not everything bulky is heavy, and not everything heavy announces itself. You learn such truths through ordinary work, and they stay in the hands rather than becoming sayings. We let them stay that way, quiet and useful, like the knowledge of how hard to close a sticking door. The toll house may have a calendar nailed to the wall, or a notice printed in official language that nobody reads unless trouble requires it. The paper edges curl from damp, a pin rusts slightly at the head. Beneath it, the wall bears marks from coats, shoulders, and years of smoke. You notice these things because the weighman notices without naming them. A workplace slowly records the bodies that return to it. Outside, a motor vehicle may pass, still distinct enough in this period to change the sound of the road. Its engine has a rough, mechanical cough beside the organic creak of carts and harness. The horse nearest it may lift its head, and a driver may mutter under his breath. The Dublin toll weighman watches it go with practical attention, not prophecy. Change often arrives first as an inconvenience, a noise that does not yet know it will become ordinary. For now, carts remain the heart of his work. Their pace shapes the day, their loads bring the city's needs to his door, their drivers bring bits of weather gossip, irritation, and patience. You and I stay with the older rhythm because the scale is still receiving iron wheels and the ledger is still filling line by line. The future can wait outside the edge of the page. A load from the keys may carry smells from farther away. Sacking, salt, rope, damp wood, and perhaps tea, sugar, or imported goods leave traces that feel different from local produce. The driver's route may have begun near warehouses where gulls circle and men shout over the movement of cranes, hand trucks, and carts. By the time he reaches the toll point, the load has become part of the inland road. The weighman records it without romance, yet the world has widened for a moment. This is another reason the role deserves our quiet attention. The toll weighman stood where distant trade became local traffic. He might not travel far during the workday, but far things passed in front of him. A barrel, a crate, a sack, or a wrapped bundle might carry the smell of river, ship, warehouse, field, or kiln. You can sense how a fixed post can still belong to movement, if the movement comes faithfully enough. The afternoon advances by such arrivals. Between them, he may clean the scale again, pushing mud away with a scraper or broom. The scrape of metal or stiff bristle against the edge is a dry, practical sound. His breath shows if the day is cold enough. His boots press into softened ground where many boots have already stood. We can feel the small effort in his knees as he bends, rises, and checks the plate. He must also watch for wear. A weighing machine treated by road traffic all day cannot be left entirely to itself. Bolts loosen, surfaces foul, and mechanisms complain in ways a practiced worker recognizes early. The weighman may not be a mechanic by title, but he knows when something feels wrong. That knowing comes from repetition, from touching the same equipment through seasons, and from caring enough to notice before failure becomes public. A driver with a mixed load creates more conversation. There may be sacks, boxes, tools, and a few household goods tied down beneath rope. The weighman asks enough questions to enter the load properly. The driver answers while rainwater drips from the cart's underside. You hear rope fibers tightening, a box corner knocking, and the soft, uneasy cluck of a horse waiting too long. The reading is made, the entry written, and the road releases them. Afternoon also brings shadows of home into the working day. The weighman may think of a room elsewhere, a family meal, an errand, or a coat needing repair. He does not disappear into those thoughts, because the road keeps calling him back. But they are there, faintly, as all private life sits behind public labor. You can sense the man inside the role, not by dramatic confession, but by the way he pauses when the road is briefly empty. Few records preserve such pauses. Official memory prefers totals, dates, appointments, and sometimes complaints. It rarely preserves the angle of light on a wet sleeve, or the smell of bread wrapped in cloth, or the way a tired man warms one hand around a cup while keeping the other near the ledger. That is why we linger. The forgotten parts of work are often the parts that make it human. A church bell sounds again, marking an hour that the weighman already felt approaching. Bells in a working city do not stop labor, they simply lay a measure over it. The sound rolls across roofs, softened by smoke and distance, then fades into cart noise. You might feel your own breathing align with that fading. The toll house, the road, and the scale remain, steady as before. The next cart carries stone, and its arrival is slow. The horse leans into the collar, hooves pressing hard into the softened road. Stone has a blunt silence to it, even when the cart groans. It smells of rain, dust, and quarry, cool and mineral. The Dublin toll weighman watches closely, because heavy loads deserve respect, and because a careless pause on the scale can make both animal and driver uneasy. He does not romanticize the strain. He simply helps the process move correctly. The cart is placed, the horse steadied, the reading taken, and the path forward cleared. You see the driver loosen his jaw when the cart moves off again. That small easing is a kind of thanks. The weighman may not receive it as such, but we do. And as afternoon begins to lean toward evening, the traffic thins, the shadows lengthen, and the toll weighman's attention turns toward closing the day without losing its smallest details. Evening does not arrive all at once at the toll point. It gathers first under the cart bodies, then in the doorway, then along the lower wall of the toll house where the damp has darkened the plaster. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman senses it through temperature before the sky fully changes. The air cools around his hands, the ink thickens slightly, and the road begins to give back the chill it has held since morning. You stand with him as the day lowers itself gently. The carts now are fewer, and each one seems more distinct. A driver returning home may sit lower on the seat, shoulders rounded, after hours of bargaining, hauling, or waiting. Empty baskets knock together behind him, smelling faintly of cabbage leaves and damp wicker. The weighman may know without asking that the day has gone well or poorly. Faces carry such accounts before words do, and he has spent years reading faces at cart height. Some loads are outward bound, carrying unsold goods or materials for the next day's work. Others are inward bound, late and tired, trying to finish before lamps are needed. The scale receives them all with its iron patience. You hear the cart come on, the pause, the small shift, and the retreat. That repeated pattern has become familiar to us now, almost like a breath drawn and released by the roadside itself. Evening light gives the ledger a different character. Figures written in morning brightness now sit beside entries made in shadow. The page becomes a record not only of traffic but of changing light across a working day. The weighman may bring the lamp closer, trimming the wick if needed, smelling the faint oily scent as it catches. We watch the flame steady. It makes the room smaller and more intimate, while the world outside turns blue-gray. The lamp also changes the look of coins. They shine in brief yellow flashes as he counts them, then dull again in the drawer. He separates, checks, and stacks according to the habits required. The sound is small but satisfying, a muted clink against wood or metal. You can feel why such tasks calm the mind when they are done slowly. Each coin belongs somewhere, and for a moment the world obeys the hand. A late coal cart may bring darkness before night has fully arrived. Its load is covered, but dust still escapes, and the driver's boots leave black marks near the scale. The weighman enters the weight by lamplight, careful not to cast his own shadow across the figure. His eyes may tire, and he may lean closer than he did at dawn. You can feel the day's length in that lean, gentle, and unmistakable. The driver might ask whether many have passed today. The weighman gives a plain answer, perhaps mentioning market traffic, rain, or the heaviness of certain loads. Such talk is not gossip in the sharp sense. It is the road speaking back to itself through those who serve it. We hear in it the modest community of people who meet because work brings them to the same place, not because friendship has been arranged. The Dublin toll weighman's obscurity grows from this same modesty. He was known locally, perhaps well enough for nods, jokes, complaints, and seasonal recognition, yet not in a way that easily crossed generations. His name might appear in a directory or payroll, but the feel of his work would not. Once the toll point changed, closed, moved, or lost its old purpose, memory had little to hold. A vanished routine leaves fewer ruins than a vanished building. Still, the place itself would have remembered for a while. The road surface near the weighbridge bore the marks of stopping and starting. The threshold held the polish of boots. The desk carried ink stains, and the wall held smoke. If you had come soon after the roll disappeared, you might still have smelled oil in the mechanism and damp paper in the room. Work leaves traces that outlive attention, though only for a time. A cartman brings a question about tomorrow's passage, asking whether a particular load should come early, or whether there will be someone at the scale. The weighman answers according to the rule, with the practical kindness of a man who knows planning matters when horses, goods, and daylight are involved. You hear the driver repeat the answer to fix it in memory. Then he moves on, and the road grows quiet again. The exchange is small, but it shows how the weighman's knowledge extended beyond the instant of weighing. He is a point of information as well as measurement. People ask about charges, delays, conditions, and sometimes about who has passed before them. He answers what he should, and leaves the rest alone. Discretion is another quiet tool. You can feel how many old jobs depended on knowing when to speak and when to let the road keep its own counsel. The lamp flame bends when the door opens. A colder gust enters, carrying the smell of wet horse, far smoke, and the faint sweetness of malt from some unseen brewery direction. Dublin in the evening is a layered thing, and the toll house receives those layers in brief drafts. The weighman steadies the paper with one hand. You see the edge flutter, then settle again under his fingers. Nothing is hurried, though everything is nearing completion. He begins to prepare the day's account in earnest when traffic allows. Entries must be checked against coins, receipts, and perhaps separate notes kept during busy moments. The arithmetic is simple in principle, but simple sums at day's end require more care than one might expect. Fatigue turns sevens into ones, or makes a line vanish beneath a hand. So he moves slowly. We move slowly with him. The toll house is quieter now, and small sounds gain importance. The pen scratches, the fire shifts, a horse passes without stopping, hooves fading down the road. Somewhere a door closes with a hollow wooden note. The weighman's breathing is almost audible when he leans over the page. You may find your own breath slowing too, because the room has narrowed to warmth, paper, and the low companionship of completed work. If a mistake appears, he traces it back through the page. There is no panic in this version of the evening, only concentration. He compares marks, recounts coins, and remembers the cart if memory can help. Perhaps the error is only a figure copied too quickly, or a payment placed in the wrong mental column. The correction is made carefully, and the page becomes trustworthy again. You feel the relief of order restored without fanfare. A final cart of the hour rolls in with household goods, perhaps a small removal or delivery delayed by rain. Chairs are tied upside down, a trunk sits under sacking, and a bundle of bedding carries the faint smell of soap and human rooms. Such loads make the weighman's station feel briefly close to private life. He records what is required and lets the cart move on. We watch it disappear, carrying someone's ordinary belongings toward another doorway. There is something especially gentle about a workplace at the edge of closing. Tools have not yet been put away, but they are beginning to seem ready for rest. The ledger lies open, the lamp burns lower, the pen waits across a blotter, and the scale outside darkens into the road. The toll weighman has not finished, but the shape of finishing is visible. You can feel it like the first loosening of a bootlace after a long day, and as the last practical duties gather around him, the evening becomes a matter of checking, closing, and leaving the toll point ready for another morning. The last duties are plain, and their plainness is part of their comfort. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman counts the takings, checks the entries, secures the papers, and makes sure the scale is not left fouled or uncertain. You stand beside him in the lamplight while the road outside grows quieter by degrees. A cart passes in the distance without stopping, and its sound thins into the damp evening. The work narrows toward order. He may wrap the ledger or place it in a drawer, depending on the rule and the trust of the little building. The cover is worn at the corners, softened by hands and weather. When it closes, it makes a low, padded sound, not quite final but close. You can imagine the day's voices settling inside it, their roughness gentled into ink. The book will not tell anyone how the rain felt, yet it has carried what it was asked to carry. The coins are gathered and secured. Their smell is metallic and faintly human, touched all day by wet hands, gloved hands, blackened hands and hands cold from rains. The weighman counts them with patient attention, because money is where suspicion can enter if care is absent. He gives suspicion no room. We watch the coins become totals, and the totals become a quiet statement that the day has been properly held. Outside, he checks the weighbridge once more. The iron plate is slick in places, and the edges hold bits of straw, grit, and coal dust. He clears what he can, working by habit in the dim light. The scrape of the tool against iron sounds lonelier now than it did at midday. You can smell wet metal rising as the cooler air settles. The scale, relieved of traffic, seems almost asleep beneath his feet. A passerby might see only a man tidying a roadside apparatus. We see more because we have stayed. We see the last act of care that makes tomorrow easier. We see the way he checks the surface not for praise, but because morning will come with carts again. In repetitive work, kindness often travels forward to one's future self. The weighman leaves the place ready for the man he will be at dawn. The toll house fire is allowed to fall low, unless the night arrangement requires otherwise. He nudges the coal with an iron poker, and sparks shift softly in the ash. The room smells warmer for a moment, then cooler as the door opens and evening enters. He gathers his own things, perhaps a scarf, a tin, a folded cloth, a newspaper saved for later. These objects feel small, but they return him from public role to private person. Before leaving, he may look once more at the road. It is darker now, with lamps beginning to show in the distance, and windows glowing where families have gathered indoors. The day's traffic has passed through and vanished into rooms, yards, shops, kitchens, warehouses, and stables. You and I remain with the man who marked that passing. He has helped the city move, and the city has mostly forgotten to notice. This is not a bitter thought in our telling. It is only a soft one. Many necessary lives are like that, felt more than named, present in the smoothness of things continuing. The Dublin toll weighman belongs to that large company of remembered by useful effects people, whose work becomes invisible precisely because it helped the day proceed. When the road works, few think of the person who kept account beside it. The air outside has deepened, and the stones hold a dull shine. His boots sound different now that the road is less busy. Each step has a little space around it. Perhaps he locks the toll house door, feeling the cold key through his fingers, and tests the latch once from habit. The sound of the lock is small, but it marks a boundary. The workday remains inside, folded into paper, iron, ash, and quiet. As he walks away, the scale stays behind in the road like a dark, level memory. It has borne coal, hay, stone, flour, timber, barrels, and crates. It has received the weight of commerce without keeping any of it. You can think of the weighman in the same way, receiving the day, recording it, and letting it pass onward. There is peace in that image, if we let it stay simple. But before we drift too far from him, there is more to understand about why his kind of work faded from common memory. Not because it lacked skill, and not because it lacked meaning. It faded because it stood between more visible things. The goods had owners, the carts had destinations, the streets had names, and the offices had officials. The toll weighman was the brief pause between them, and pauses are easily edited out when people tell stories later. Yet a pause can be the very thing that makes movement possible. At the scale, the road slowed just long enough to become accountable. A cart was not merely passing, it was known, weighed, and entered. That knowledge helped settle fees, maintain roads, regulate burdens, and support the small civic order that sits beneath daily life. You feel the calm strength of that order here, not as command, but as the quiet shape of fairness. The weighman's skill lived partly in exactness and partly in temperament. He needed numbers, but he also needed patience with weather, animals, drivers, officials, delays, and his own tiredness. He needed to keep his place in the flow without becoming hard. If he became too soft, the record suffered. If he became too severe, the road grew sour around him. So he practiced a middle manner, steady as the pointer settling on the scale. Perhaps that is what we remember now, more than any single name. The manner of the work. The small office with the dim lamp, the iron plate set into the road, the ledger breathing damply on the desk, the man in the doorway, watching the next cart approach through mist or rain or low morning light. The scene returns because it was repeated so many times that it seems to have worn a path into the air. In the morning, he will come again if it is his shift. The toll house will be cold at first, and the fire reluctant. The ledger will wait with yesterday's totals behind it and blank lines ahead. The scale will have gathered moisture overnight. You can almost hear him set down his things, open the room, and bring the little workplace back into use. Nothing dramatic announces the day. It begins because the work is there, and when the first cart comes, perhaps with coal for a kitchen range or flour for a baker's oven, he will step out and raise his hand in that small practiced signal. The horse will slow, the wheels will climb the plate, the load will settle. The Dublin toll weighman will wait until the measure is true, and then he will write. We know the movement now, and because we know it, it feels almost restful. There is a comfort in work that repeats without being empty. Each repetition is shaped by weather, load, mood, and light, but the frame remains familiar. The weighman can trust the frame even when the details vary. You may feel something similar in your own mind as the story turns, the same road, the same scale, the same careful hand returning again and again. Repetition becomes a kind of shelter when it is held gently. The forgotten nature of the job does not make it less worthy of attention. If anything, it asks for a softer kind. We do not need to rescue it with noise. We can simply stand beside it for a while, letting the damp air, the ledger, the horse breath, and the iron plate return to presence. That is enough. Some histories are best approached at walking pace, with no wish to hurry them into brightness. The toll Weighman's Dublin is a city of thresholds. Doors between shop and street, bridges between banks, keys between river and warehouse, and scales between movement and account. He belongs to those thresholds, which may be why he is hard to place in memory. People remember where they began and where they arrived. They remember less clearly the quiet person who marked their passing. We can let that truth rest without sadness. If we listen closely, the road itself seems to keep a faint echo of him. Not a voice, exactly, but the rhythm of stopping and starting, the hush before a reading, the scratch of the pen in the small room. Rain softens the stones, lamps blur in the distance, a horse lowers its head, a driver waits with one hand on the reins. The Weighman looks, waits, records, and allows the cart onward into the evening. This is how the day returns to itself, not as a grand circle, but as a set of familiar motions. Open the door, warm the room, clear the scale, weigh the cart, enter the line, count the coin, answer the question, watch the road, close the book. Each action has weight, and each weight is bearable when taken in order. We can rest inside that order for a little longer. The city beyond him keeps changing, of course. Roads are remade, traffic quickens, horses give way to engines, and offices find new ways to count what moves through them. The old toll point may be altered, removed, paved over, or repurposed, until no passerby knows what stood there. Yet beneath the new surface, in the imagination at least, the iron plate remains cool and dark. The Weighman remains beside it, patient and nearly unseen. A later person might find his name in a record and pass over it quickly. Toll Weighman, perhaps listed in a directory, payroll, census, or minute book, a few words beside an address or department. The entry would not explain the smell of wet harness, the feel of coins, or the way early light caught the breath of a horse on a cold morning. That is where our listening does the work records cannot do. We fill the silence carefully, without pretending to know more than the scene allows. We know enough to honor the routine. We know roads needed upkeep, goods needed weighing, fees needed collecting, and public accounts needed hands to make them real. We know Dublin in the 1900s still depended on carts, horses, markets, keys, and small offices where practical authority lived close to mud. We know someone had to stand there. Tonight, we have let that someone be present. The toll house, in our mind, is quiet again after the day's work. The fire is low, the lamp trimmed down, and the ledger closed with its damp pages resting flat. Outside, the scale lies in the road, empty for the moment, holding no load and asking for none. The smell of coal dust still lingers near the threshold. Somewhere beyond, a late wheel turns over stone, then fades, leaving only the soft city night around the place where weighing will begin again. Before that night fully settles, we can stay a little longer with the place itself, because a toll Weighman's work did not begin and end only with the carts that stopped in front of him. The 1900s Dublin toll Weighman lived inside a small web of roads, offices, yards, stables, markets and quays, and each part sent its faint pressure toward the scale. You can feel that web in the air after closing, when the road is quieter but not empty. A late hoofbeat, a distant call, and the smell of smoke remind us that the city keeps breathing. The toll point may have stood near a route where country traffic entered the city, or near a place where goods needed to be checked before moving deeper into Dublin's streets. Such stations were practical before they were picturesque. They were built where traffic had to narrow, slow, or declare itself. You can picture the small house set close to the road, with its window placed for watching rather than admiring. Everything about it says that work is meant to happen here, steadily and without ornament. In the morning, when the Weighman returns, he brings his own weather with him. His coat may still hold the smell of yesterday's smoke, and his boots may carry dried mud that cracks at the heel. He unlocks the door, and the toll house gives back the stale breath of a room left closed overnight. You step in with him and notice the chill first, then the old ink, then the faint metal scent from coins and fittings. It is a small room, but it holds the whole road in waiting. He opens the shutters or clears the window with his sleeve if condensation has clouded the glass. Outside, the weighbridge is dull with damp. The edges need checking before any loaded cart arrives, because a little packed grit can make an honest measure troublesome. The Dublin toll weighman takes a broom or scraper and tends to the iron plate. You hear the bristles drag over wet metal, and the sound is low enough to belong to dawn. This task is not separate from weighing. It is part of the same care. A scale must be allowed to speak clearly, and that means clearing away what the road leaves behind. Mud, straw, coal dust, splinters, grit, and bits of sacking all have a way of lodging in corners. You watch him bend, scrape, straighten, and look again. The body repeats these motions until they become almost as natural as breathing in cold air. The first cart has not yet arrived, but the work has begun. That is often true of quiet jobs. The visible part comes later, after preparation has made it possible. The weighman checks the ledger, sees whether the pen is ready, counts what was left ready for change, and wakes the fire if there is coal enough. We notice the small sequence because it tells us something gentle about labor. A day becomes manageable when its first acts are known. A kettle may be set near the heat, though the water will take time. While it warms, the room fills with soft ticking sounds, metal expanding, ash shifting, and perhaps a faint drip near the door where rain has found its way in. The weighman listens for the road through all of it. His attention is never only in one place. It rests on the fire, the page, the scale, and the lane beyond the window, lightly touching each one. The reason few remember him is partly that his best work created no interruption. When he performed the job well, carts passed with only the required pause, accounts stayed clear, drivers grumbled no more than usual, and goods continued onward. Smoothness hides its maker. You notice the bread, not the millstone's maintenance, the warm room, not the coal's accounting, the market stall, not the person who weighed the load on the way in. The toll weighman served continuity, and continuity often leaves little applause behind. But here, in the quiet before traffic, continuity has a face. He may rub warmth into his hands and look once more toward the road. The sky is pale over Dublin, and the roofs hold a bluish damp that will not lift quickly. Somewhere a horse coughs, and a stable door slides or swings open with a wooden complaint. You feel the city preparing itself through hundreds of small sounds. The weighman prepares too, and his preparation is one of them. A cart approaches slowly, not yet urgent, its wheels making a hollow rhythm through the morning hush. The driver sits hunched under a cap, and the horse's mane is beaded with mist. The load may be sacks, tied down under rough cloth, giving off a dry grain smell even through the damp. The Dublin toll weighman steps out to meet it, neither cheerful nor severe. He is simply there, and that presence is the first tool of the trade. The cart climbs onto the plate. There is a shifting of wood, rope, animal weight, and goods, all finding their brief stillness together. The weighman waits for the reading to settle, because he has learned that accuracy has its own pace. The driver looks toward the road ahead, already thinking of the next stop. You and I stay with the pause. We let it lengthen, because within that pause, the whole job appears. A toll weighman had to understand the difference between movement and rest. The cart is meant to move, but the measure requires stillness. The driver is meant to deliver, but the record requires delay. The horse is meant to pull, but the scale requires standing. The weighman holds those needs together for a moment and then releases them. It is a modest kind of mediation, repeated so often that nobody thinks to call it by a larger name. The entry is made. The page receives the load as a line of ink, which is both less and more permanent than the cart itself. The cart will unload, move on, and perhaps be forgotten by supper. The line may remain for years in some bundle, though stripped of the weather and smell that made it real. We can feel both kinds of vanishing at once. The road forgets quickly, and paper remembers narrowly. As the morning gathers pace again, a familiar driver may bring news from another part of the city. Nothing dramatic, only that a road is poor after rain, a warehouse is delayed, a horse has gone lame, or a market is crowded. The weighman listens while keeping one eye on the task. Information moves through toll points like drafts through a doorway. You hear it pass, brief and useful, then gone. This is part of the lost social life of the station. The toll house was not a tavern, not a shop, and not a home. Yet it shared a little with all three. People paused there, paid there, complained there, asked there, and sometimes warmed a hand by the doorway if the relationship allowed it. The Dublin toll weighman stood inside those boundaries. He made room for speech, but not too much, because the road was waiting. A driver carrying milk or dairy goods brings a sharper morning smell, cool and faintly sweet beneath the smell of horse. The cans knock with a soft metallic note, rounded and regular. If the road is uneven, the liquid inside shifts, and the cart seems to answer itself in hidden waves. The weighman records what is needed, careful with the language of the load. You can almost feel the cold of the metal cans against your hand. The milk will not stay at the toll point. It belongs to doorsteps, kitchens, tea, porridge, and children's breakfasts. Yet for this moment it belongs also to the scale, the fee, and the ledger. So much of the weighman's work is this temporary belonging. Goods become his concern only long enough to be weighed and entered, then they pass back into the city. He keeps no claim on them except the accuracy of their passage. The horse shifts, and the driver murmurs to it. Animal patience is part of the soundscape here. Leather creaks, a tail flicks, a hoof scrapes stone, and warm breath moves into cold air. The weighman knows that a nervous horse can make a reading difficult, and a tired horse deserves more time than an impatient driver may want to give. We stand with him in that small animal understanding, practical and unspoken. He may have seen many horses over the years, some strong, some underfed, some stubborn, some gentle enough to seem half asleep. Their names may be better remembered by drivers than the weighman's own name is remembered by history. A white sock, a scarred flank, a favorite pace, a habit of leaning left. These details help him read the road. You begin to notice them too. The job teaches observation by repetition, not by lecture. A cart carrying sacks of potatoes has a sound different from grain. The sacks sit lumpier, shifting with a dull thud when the wheels settle. The smell is earthy, cool, and faintly sweet, with a cellar note that belongs to stored food. The driver's hands show dirt in the lines of the skin. The Dublin toll weighman weighs the load and writes it down, and somewhere later those potatoes will become a meal without anyone thinking of the scale. We can let that ordinary chain soothe us. Field to cart, cart to road, road to scale, scale to market, market to kitchen, kitchen to table. None of it needs to hurry in the telling. Each step has hands, smells, textures, and small waiting places. The toll weighman is one of those waiting places, human and necessary, standing between earth and appetite with a pen in his hand. At times, the work might require distinguishing between gross and tare weight, between the full cart and the cart when empty, though the details depended on the arrangement of the station and the goods. The idea is simple enough when said slowly. A load's true measure may require knowing what carries it. The cart has weight, the goods have weight, and fairness sometimes lies in separating one from the other. You can sense why such work needed care more than speed. An empty cart returning across the scale has a looseness almost cheerful after heavy loads. It rattles and bounces, the boards speaking too freely now that weight no longer presses them down. The weighman may note it if needed, or compare it with an earlier entry. The driver may be relieved, the horse lighter in its step. We notice the change in sound, because sound is one of the ways weight makes itself known before numbers do. Numbers, for the weighman, are never abstract for long. They arrive with breath, mud, timber, rope, and coin. They smell of coal or flour. They complain through axles. They stand in line on wet mornings. This is why his arithmetic has a texture that an office total cannot carry. When he adds a column, he is adding more than marks, though the page can only show the marks. Perhaps, when the morning is steady but not crowded, a young assistant or temporary hand might watch and learn, or a curious boy might linger too near the mechanism. The weighman would tell him to stand clear, not harshly, because heavy carts and moving parts deserve respect. The warning would be practical, calm, and soon forgotten by the child. You and I hear it as another small thread in the day, a voice keeping the edge of the work safe without making a spectacle of it. The tools of the station are few, and that makes each one familiar. Pen, ledger, ruler, blotter, scraper, broom, lamp, key, perhaps stamps, tickets, or forms depending on the toll arrangement. Each has its place, and each place reduces trouble. The weighman does not need beauty from them, yet use gives them a worn grace. You can see the handle polished by fingers, the ink bottle ring on the desk, the broom bristles splayed from long service. The scale itself is the central object, but the job is not only mechanical, it is also clerical, social, bodily, and environmental. Rain, people, animals, machinery, paperwork, and money all meet at once. The toll weighman must be fluent in this meeting. He must move from checking mud at the plate to answering a fee question to making a clear entry before the ink dries too slowly. We feel the quiet complexity beneath the plain title. A title like Toll Weighman can sound almost too simple now. It does not show the cold mornings, the interruptions, the watchfulness, the diplomacy, or the way a man learned a city's trade by standing in one place. That simplicity contributes to his forgetting. Later generations see the label and pass on, thinking they know enough. But you and I have spent the time to open the label gently, and inside it, there is a whole working atmosphere. The morning continues. A baker's cart may pass, smelling of flour, yeast, and warm wood from ovens already alive before dawn. Even if it does not stop, its scent enters the toll house and changes the room for a moment. The weighman looks up, then down again. The road is full of such passing comforts, brief and unowned. You notice how a smell can make a workplace feel less lonely without altering the work at all. Then a heavier vehicle arrives, loaded with materials for repair or building, and the scale returns to its purpose. The wheels approach with a slower grind. The driver leans forward, guiding the horse carefully. The load is not tall, but it sits dense and serious in the cart bed. The Dublin toll weighman steps out, watches the alignment, and gives a quiet instruction. The cart settles, and the number becomes the next fact of the day. By now the page is filling. Lines of ink create their own road across the paper, each one a stop already completed. The weighman's hand travels that road repeatedly, from left to right, from name to load to weight to fee. You can feel the trance of it, but not a careless trance. It is the kind of absorbed rhythm that lets time pass without vanishing entirely. Work has become a measured current. The toll house floor may be gritty beneath his boots. Fine particles come in, no matter how often he sweeps, because the road is always touching the room through shoes, hems, wheels, and wind. The grit makes a faint sound when he turns. It reminds us that this office is not sealed away from labor. It is porous, open to weather and traffic. The DUBLIN toll weighman is an indoor-outdoor worker, belonging to neither category completely. That in-between quality can make a person hard to remember. People remember the clerk in the office or the laborer in the yard more readily than someone who is both and neither. The toll weighman writes like a clerk, watches like a guard, handles money like a collector, tends machinery like a caretaker, and speaks with drivers like a roadside official. His identity spreads across functions. History, liking neat shelves, may not know where to put him, yet the day knows where to put him. It puts him at the scale, it puts the ledger under his hand, it puts the road in front of his window. That is enough for the working hours. You can take comfort in that clarity, because many old jobs were defined less by explanation than by place. To know where you stood was often to know what you did. A light change comes over the sky, and with it the smell of the road shifts again. Damp stone warms slightly, horse sweat grows stronger, and chimney smoke lifts rather than clinging low. The weighman may remove his coat for a while, or loosen the scarf at his throat. These small adjustments mark time as surely as a clock. You can feel the body answering the day, layer by layer, without any need for announcement. A driver brings in a cart loaded with sacks marked for a merchant whose name the weighman knows by sight. The markings are stenciled, blurred in places, dark against rough cloth. The sacks rub together with a dry whisper. The weighman reads enough to identify the load and asks what is necessary. The driver answers while wiping his nose with the back of his glove. The whole exchange is practical, but full of life when we slow it down. The word practical has its own softness here. It means things are done because they need doing, in ways learned from other days. It means a rag is kept where spills happen, a hook where a coat belongs, a spare nib where a pen may fail. It means the toll weighman has arranged his small world to reduce friction. We can feel the calm that comes from such arrangement. It is not luxury, but it is care. Sometimes the road sends surprises, though not the kind that disturb our quiet. A load may be poorly tied, and the weighman may ask the driver to secure it before proceeding. A wheel may need a moment, a horse may balk at the plate. The scale itself may complain in a way that asks for checking. These are variations within the slow music of the job. They keep the work alert without making it sharp. If a horse hesitates, the driver's voice changes first. It lowers, softens, or tightens depending on the man. The weighman gives room, because forcing the matter can make it worse. The animal sniffs, shifts, and finally steps onto the iron, hooves sounding different there than on stone. You hear that change clearly, a harder ring beneath the damp morning. Then stillness returns, and the reading can be made. The surface of the weighbridge must have felt strange to some horses, especially when wet. Iron holds cold differently from roadstone, and it can echo beneath the hoof. The weighman knows this through countless small delays. He does not need to name it. He simply allows the few extra moments when they are needed. We notice that as a form of kindness shaped by experience, quiet enough to be missed by anyone in a hurry. A cart of turf or fuel brings another older scent into the city. It smells of earth, smoke yet to happen, and damp places beyond paved streets. The load may be stacked neatly, each piece rough against the next. The driver's clothing carries a country smell that briefly alters the toll point's air. The Dublin toll weighman records the passage, and the city draws that future warmth inward, one cart at a time. Fuel loads remind us how much daily comfort once depended on heavy movement. Heat did not arrive invisibly through hidden systems. It came by cart, sack, barrow, hand, and account. Someone cut it, stacked it, carried it, weighed it, sold it, and burned it. The toll weighman's line in the ledger is one calm mark within that chain. You may feel the warmth of an unseen kitchen fire already waiting inside the cold load. The day is now busy enough that the weighman's body finds its efficient path. Step out, guide, wait, read, return, write, receive, answer, release. Each verb could be expanded into a dozen details, and each detail has been shaped by repetition. We follow him through them slowly, because slow attention is the proper measure for quiet work. A hurried description would miss the very thing the job teaches. There may be a chair inside, but sitting is often temporary. The road draws him up again and again. He learns not to settle too deeply, not to let his thoughts wander too far from the window. This partial rest gives the work its peculiar rhythm. You are never entirely idle, never entirely rushed. You hover in readiness, and readiness itself becomes tiring in a soft, persistent way. The Dublin toll weighman's memory of days may blur together after years. One wet Tuesday resembles another, one coal cart another, one dispute over a fee another. Yet within the blur, certain things remain clear. A winter morning when the scale froze stiff, a summer day when dust lay thick on everything, a driver who always sang under his breath, a horse that would not step onto iron without a handful of oats. Human memory keeps small hooks where official memory keeps none. We can imagine him later, at home or walking back through evening streets, carrying fragments of the road with him. Coal dust under the nail, ink on the finger, the smell of horse in the coat. A figure from the ledger still repeating itself in his mind. The job does not end entirely when the door closes. Work like this follows softly, not as drama, but as residue. You know a day has been real when it leaves traces on the body. A bell from a nearby establishment, factory, church, or yard may mark another hour. The weighman looks up, not because the bell commands him, but because sound naturally lifts the face. The road at that moment might be empty, shining faintly after a brief shower. He takes the chance to stretch his fingers. The knuckles crack softly. Then the next cart appears, and the small interval closes. The approaching driver is known to him, and known people change the texture of work. A stranger requires one kind of attention, a regular another. The regular may not need every question spoken, because habit fills in part of the form. Yet the weighman still checks what must be checked. Familiarity may ease conversation, but it does not replace measure. That boundary is one of the quiet strengths of the job. The driver may say that the load is lighter today, and the weighman may answer that the scale will tell them both. There is no sharpness in that, only the old trust placed in the instrument. The cart rolls on, the reading settles, and perhaps the driver is right. A small smile may pass between them. You can feel how fairness, when made routine, can become companionable rather than cold. A toll point also taught waiting to those who might not otherwise choose it. Drivers had to wait for the cart ahead, wait for the reading, wait for the receipt, wait for the road to clear. The weighman had to wait for the load to settle, the ink to dry, the horse to calm, and the official day to complete itself. We wait with them now, and waiting becomes less empty. It fills with sound, smell, posture, and attention. The smell of the river may grow stronger if the wind turns. Dublin's air carries water in many moods. Rainwater in gutters, river damp near the quays, and the clean wetness of washed stone. The toll weighman breathes it without remark. You notice it because we are moving slowly enough to notice. A city is partly made of its smells, and working people know them better than visitors do. Another load from a warehouse arrives under canvas, its contents hidden but suggested by shape. Square boxes press against the cloth. Ropes cross over them, and the whole cart smells of tarred cover, packing straw, and salt air. The weighman asks, listens, weighs, and writes. The hidden goods continue onward with their mystery intact. He does not need to open everything to account for it. His task is precise, but not all-knowing. That limited knowledge may have suited the role. He knew enough to perform the public duty, not enough to own the private story of every load. There is rest in that boundary. We do not need to follow each crate to its destination. We can remain where the road pauses, content with the wait and the passing. The toll weighman's world is not small, because it is fixed. It is deep, because so much moves through it. As the day warms further, the toll house door may stand open. Air enters, along with flies, dust, and the shifting noise of wheels. The open door makes the room less private and more like an alcove of the road. The weighman moves between desk and threshold, until the two places feel connected by a path worn into the floor. You can see that path, even if only in imagination, where boots have turned the same way for years. The desk's surface bears practical geography. Ledger in the center, ink to one side, coins near the drawer, notices pinned or weighted, cloth within reach, and perhaps a personal item kept back from the work's mess. A pipe, a small knife, a folded letter, or a matchbox might sit there. These things remind us that the toll weighman was not only his function. He had preferences, habits, irritations, comforts, and private thoughts that history did not need and therefore did not keep. A noon meal approaches again in the cycle of the day, and hunger announces itself quietly. The weighman may feel it as a hollow patience, a slight thinning of attention, a desire for tea stronger than the desire for conversation. He waits for a gap, because gaps are the only dining room the road provides. You sit near the window as he unwraps bread. The smell is plain and good, especially after coal, wet rope, and horse leather. A driver arrives before the first bite, and the cloth folds closed again. This time, perhaps the weighman gives the faintest breath through his nose, not quite a sigh, only a private acknowledgement that the road has won. He steps out. The load is weighed, the line is written. Then he returns, and the bread waits exactly where he left it, a little cooler than before. Such interruptions are small, but a day is made of them. We can feel the patience required not to become sharp under small interruptions. A single delay is nothing. 100 delays shape the nerves. The toll weighman's calm, if he keeps it, is not because the work is empty, but because he has trained himself to let each small demand arrive and depart. That training has no certificate. It lives in his shoulders, his voice, and the way he sets down his pen. The official side of the work may require neat closing totals later, but throughout the day he keeps smaller mental balances. How many carts have passed since the last count? Which driver promised to return with tare weight? Whether the scale sounded right after the heavy stone load? Whether the rain is likely to turn the entrance slick? You can sense his mind moving quietly among these concerns, never far from the road. If a constable, inspector, or municipal official passes, the toll point becomes briefly part of a broader civic fabric. The exchange may be no more than a nod or a few words. Still, it reminds us that the Weighman's little station is connected to decisions, rules and offices beyond itself. Those offices may have larger rooms and cleaner desks, but they depend on the figures made here. We see the chain from roadside mud to administrative order. The Dublin toll weighman, then, is not simply a relic of quaint traffic. He is a worker in the practical making of public knowledge. The city cannot manage what it does not measure, and in his modest way, he helps goods become measurable. He does this without speeches, without theory, and without leaving much of himself on the page. The humility of the role is not decorative. It is built into the task. The afternoon brings back the heavier trades. Coal, stone, timber, barrels, and perhaps scrap metal come with deeper sounds and stronger smells. The road seems to lower its voice under them. The weighman's instructions remain calm because heavy loads answer poorly to fluster. He watches the wheels, the horse, the plate, the driver's hands. You begin to understand how much looking is contained in a job that outsiders might mistake for simple waiting. Looking is labor when accuracy depends on it. He looks for alignment, settling, load description, signs of strain, and the small practical truths drivers sometimes omit because they are tired or hopeful. He looks at coins, at figures, at weather, at the condition of the scale. His eyes do not rest as much as his body might suggest. We can feel that attentive quiet as the afternoon gathers weight around him. A barrel cart arrives with a hollow, rounded rumble. The barrels are wedged carefully, but they still speak to one another as the cart moves. The smell is wood, old liquid, damp rope, and perhaps malt if the load comes from a brewery district. The weighman knows the handling of barrels well. They are common enough to be ordinary, but their rounded weight demands respect. The cart stops, the reading steadies, and the ledger receives another line. Dublin's brewing and trading life would have sent many such loads through streets and yards, and a weighman near the right route would have known their rhythm by season and hour. We need not make the scene grand. It is enough to imagine the casks under a grey sky, the horse patient, the driver leaning on one elbow, and the weighman writing by a window smudged with damp. The ordinary image carries its own quiet fullness. A smaller cart follows, carrying parcels and boxes for local delivery. Its load is lighter, but more varied, and the driver has to explain more. The weighman listens with his pen ready. Words become categories, categories become entries, and entries become the day's account. You hear how language itself becomes part of the weighing, not only how much, but what kind, from where, and sometimes for whom. There may be moments when the weighman's judgment is needed because the rule does not fit the load perfectly. Old systems always meet awkward cases: a mixed cart, a damaged mark, a returning load, a disputed tear, a driver without the expected paper. The weighman applies what he knows, perhaps refers to a notice, perhaps makes a note for later checking. He does not resolve the world. He keeps the day moving within the rule as best he can. That phrase, as best he can, belongs to many forgotten jobs. Perfection is rarely available on a wet roadside with horses waiting. What matters is honest care, clear habit, and enough patience to avoid careless harm. The Dublin toll weighman practiced those virtues in small units: a correct figure, a fair fee, a calm answer, a cleaned edge of the scale. These are not heroic acts, but they are the fabric of dependable work. As the afternoon begins to cool, shadows from passing carts stretch longer across the plate. The iron briefly reflects the sky where it is wet. A few loose straws cling to the surface. shining pale against dark metal until the weighman brushes them away. The tactile world is always returning. Paper, iron, wool, leather, straw, mud, coin, wood. We can rest among these textures because they ask no sudden thought from us. A driver may offer a bit of news about a street being torn up, a bridge delay, or a poor stretch of road outside the city. Road condition matters to everyone here. A bad rut can break an axle, slow a horse, alter delivery, and make tempers short at the scale. The weighman listens with the attention of someone whose work depends on the routes beyond his sight. Though he stands still, his knowledge travels outward along the roads. The toll point may also collect complaints, because fixed workers often become receivers of things they cannot change. Drivers complain about charges, road surfaces, weather, officials, buyers, and delays. The weighman cannot mend all of it. He can only distinguish what concerns his duty from what belongs to the general burden of the day. You hear his responses stay measured, neither cold nor overly inviting. He allows the words to pass, like carts. This emotional economy is another hidden skill. To absorb every irritation would wear a person thin. To reject every irritation would make the station harsh. The toll weighman finds the middle again, letting people be human without letting the road dissolve into complaint. We notice the gentleness of that balance. It is a kind of hospitality with a boundary around it. Evening moves nearer, and the returning carts begin again. Some are empty, some half empty, and some carry goods back because trade did not go as planned. The sounds are looser now, with more rattle and less deep strain. The drivers' voices are lower. Horses know the homeward direction and sometimes pull with a different mind. The Dublin toll weighman reads that too, because a day at the roadside teaches the moods of return. The ledger's later entries may be less tidy, if the light is poor, though he tries to keep them clear. A lamp is lit before darkness makes it necessary, because waiting too long invites mistakes. The flame takes, trembles, then steadies behind glass. The room gains a circle of amber, and beyond it the window grows reflective. You can see the weighman's own outline faintly in the pane, superimposed on the road he has watched all day. This reflection is a quiet image of the job itself. He is both inside and outside. He sees the road, and the road gives back his shape. He belongs to the traffic, but he also stands apart from it. Few remember him because thresholds are easy to cross and hard to describe. Yet tonight, we pause at the threshold and let the figure remain visible a little longer. A final rush may come before closing, not dramatic, only inconvenient in the way late work often is. Several carts arrive close together, each driver hoping to finish and be gone. The weighman does not let their eagerness shorten the process. One cart at a time, one reading at a time, one entry at a time. We feel the calm authority of sequence, which is perhaps the deepest comfort this work offers. The first cart carries wood offcuts, smelling dry and resinous under damp air. The second carries returned crates, sour with old straw and vegetable leaves. The third carries stone tools or iron fittings that knock sharply when the wheels settle. Each load changes the air for a moment. The weighman moves through them steadily, letting each have its proper measure before the next takes its place. The queue shortens, and the road exhales. When the last of that group departs, the silence after it feels almost physical. The weighman remains standing for a moment, perhaps because his body is still expecting another call. You know that feeling from any work built on response? The task ends before the nerves have fully agreed. He looks down the road, listens, and only then returns to the desk. The pen lies where he left it, waiting without impatience. Now the evening account begins again. He turns pages carefully, reviews the day's line of weights and fees, and checks them against the money received. The lamplight makes the ink shine in places. His hand casts a soft moving shadow over the columns. You hear the coins count out, pause, count again. Accuracy at this hour is slower than in the morning, but perhaps more satisfying, because it gathers the whole day into order. If he finds everything balanced, there may be no outward sign of relief. He simply proceeds to the next duty, but inside, a small easing occurs. The day has held. The records match. The road's many passages have been caught well enough. We sit with that quiet satisfaction, the kind that does not need anyone else to notice it in order to be real. The Dublin toll weighman may make a final note about unusual traffic, weather, a mechanical concern, or a discrepancy resolved during the day. Such notes, if kept, would be plain. They would not say that the rain sounded soft on the roof, or that one horse stood with unusual patience, or that bread tasted better after being interrupted twice. Official notes are lean creatures. The richer memory stays in the worker, then fades with him, unless someone listens backward. We are listening backward now, gently, and without forcing the past to become louder than it was. We let the toll house remain modest. We let the work remain repetitive. We let the man be ordinary, because ordinariness is not a flaw in a sleep story, or in a working life. The beauty here lies in attention, in the way a small task can reveal a whole city when watched through a quiet window. As the account is secured, he may clean the pen, cap the ink, and set the blotter aside. Each item returns to its place. The room becomes legible again. The desk, which held the disorder of use all day, now holds the calm of readiness. You can feel the difference between a workplace abandoned and a workplace closed properly. The weighman leaves the latter because tomorrow deserves that care. Outside, the scale receives one last glance. It is empty, but not neglected. The road around it is darkening, with puddles reflecting the first stronger lamps. A faint smell of manure, coal smoke, and wet stone rises together in the evening air. The weighman clears a small piece of debris near the edge with his boot. Then he stands still, listening. A city at dusk is never silent, but the sounds have moved farther apart. He locks the toll house, or hands over if another watch or arrangement continues beyond him. Either way, his portion of the day loosens from his shoulders. The key turns, the latch holds. He may tuck the key away with the same hand that has counted coins and held the pen since morning. You notice the hand because the job lives there as much as anywhere. Ink, grit, chill, and habit have all passed through it. On his walk away, the city he has helped account for surrounds him in other forms. Coal smoke from homes he did not enter. Bread from flour he may have weighed. Light from fuel carts that paused at his scale. Walls repaired with stone or brick that crossed his plate. We need not say he thinks of all this. He may only think of supper, warmth, or dry socks. But we can see the connections resting quietly around him. The street lamps, if lit along his route, make the wet stones glow in broken patches. His boots step from shine to shadow and back again. Voices pass from doorways, softened by walls and curtains. Somewhere a horse is being unharnessed, and the leather gives a final creak before rest. The weighman's day at the toll point is over, yet the materials of that day continue their evening transformation into heat, food, shelter, and sleep. And before we follow him fully away from the roadside, we can return once more to the reason he is forgotten, because that forgetting is woven into the very quiet usefulness of the work. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman did not make the load, sell the load, buy the load, or consume the load. He did not build the road, though his figures may have helped maintain the order around it. He did not own the scale in any grand sense, though he cared for it more intimately than distant authorities could. He was the keeper of a necessary pause. Necessary pauses rarely get remembered unless someone decides to stand inside them and listen. Most people met him while thinking about something else. The driver thought of the horse, the hour, the buyer, the rain, the next turn, the fee, or the state of the road ahead. The merchant thought of delivery. The clerk thought of totals. The city thought of revenue and regulation. The weighman himself thought of doing the thing correctly. None of them were preparing a memory for us, which is why the scene arrives now as a quiet reconstruction rather than a named tale. There is honesty in admitting that. We do not know every detail of one man's day, and we do not need to pretend we do. We know the materials, the routines, the period, the city, the role, and the kind of attention such work required. From those, we can build a room that feels true enough to rest in. The fire is modest, the ledger damp-edged, the road active, and the scale central beneath the wheels. The job faded because systems changed too. As motor traffic increased, as municipal structures altered, as roads, markets, and weighing practices shifted, the roadside toll weighman became less familiar. New offices, new machines, new traffic patterns, and new regulations drew the old role apart. A task once embodied by a man in a small toll house might become distributed among depots, clerks, inspectors, and mechanical records elsewhere. The person at the threshold became harder to see. But in the period we are walking through, the threshold still has a keeper. He wears out boots at the same patch of ground. He knows the sound of laden wheels before he knows the driver's face. He can tell when a cart is badly balanced by the way it leans into the plate. He warms ink, counts coins, listens to complaints, and gives the day a line-by-line shape. We stay with that version of the world because it is slow enough for sleep. A quiet job often asks to be understood through repetition rather than explanation. So we let the cart come again, the wheel approaches, the horse breathes, the driver waits, the scale settles, the weighman reads. Then the pen moves, then the coin sounds, then the road opens. Again and again, with rain sometimes, with sun sometimes, with fog in the morning and lamplight in the evening, the same frame holds different loads. There is no need to make the weighman lonely in order to make him interesting. He may have had regular company, familiar faces, and the daily sociability of roadside work, yet his role still carried a certain solitude, because responsibility finally rested in his own attention. He could hear the road around him, but the reading had to be his. You feel that mild solitude at the moment he bends over the ledger, separated from conversation by the need to get the figure right. That moment repeats until it becomes the shape of the life, a line of ink after a line of ink. A small act of public trust carried out in private concentration. The toll house may be noisy just outside and still quiet at the desk. We rest in that contrast. It is like rain on a roof while a person writes by lamplight, the outer world present but softened by the act of careful work. The materials of the job also explain its disappearance. Paper decays, toll houses are altered, scales are removed, roads are resurfaced, and the bodies that knew the routine grow old. Unlike a cathedral, a bridge, or a factory chimney, the weighman's workplace might leave only faint marks. A plate lifted from the road, a ledger stored away, a title in a record, perhaps a memory in a family that no longer knows what the title meant. Quiet work often leaves quiet evidence. Still, the evidence is not nothing. The idea of weighing for toll, fee, fairness, or account belongs to a long history of trade. The person doing it in 1900s Dublin stood within that history, though likely without thinking of it as history at all. He thought of the next cart. He thought of the rule. He thought of the pen working properly in damp weather. You and I can hold both views together, the broad history and the next small task. A city is made livable by people who handle the next small task. Someone sweeps, measures, lights, watches, files, repairs, opens, closes, checks, and records. The toll weighman is one of these people. His obscurity is therefore not emptiness, but kinship with countless other workers whose names fall away while their steadiness remains in the shape of ordinary life. You can let that thought be gentle, like a hand resting on a worn wooden rail. The toll house returns in the imagination with its low roof and practical window. Morning moisture beads on the glass. A ledger waits on the desk. Outside, the iron plate lies dark and level in the road. The weighman opens the door and steps into the day's first chill. We know this scene now so well that it can repeat without effort. Each return makes it softer, more familiar, easier to drift beside. The first cart of another day carries flour. The sacks are pale in the dim light, rounded and tied, with dust gathered near the seams. The driver's sleeves look ghosted with white. The horse stands patiently after only one reminder. The Dublin toll weighman takes the reading and writes it down. A small cloud of flour scent remains after the cart moves on, mingling with damp stone and early smoke. The second cart carries coal. Its darkness follows the flour like night following dawn. The weighman's fingers smudge when he handles the receipt, and he wipes them before returning to the ledger. The load is heavy, the horse steady, the driver quiet. The scale settles with a firmer authority. You can hear the low shift of coal pieces under canvas, like muted stones being turned by an unseen hand. The third cart carries vegetables, and the air grows earthy again. Cabbage, roots, wet leaves, straw, and old wood all arrive together. A loose leaf falls near the plate, bright green against the dull road. The weighman notices it only enough to move it aside later. His attention is on the reading, but our attention can hold both the reading and the leaf. Sleepy attention is generous that way. These repeating loads become almost a lullaby of work. Flour, coal, vegetables, timber, barrels, stone, crates, hay. Each has its weight, scent, sound, and destination. Each pauses beneath the weighman's eye. Each becomes a line and then continues. We can let the sequence turn slowly in the mind, not as a list snapped into place, but as a procession moving through mist, one cart at a time. The drivers, too, form a procession. The early man who speaks little, the cheerful one who complains as a habit rather than a grievance, the careful woman with coins tied in cloth, the boy learning a route from the seat beside an older hand, the tired carter who has been up since dark. The Dublin toll weighman sees them all in passing, and passing is enough to build recognition over years. Recognition has a warmth different from friendship. It may not enter the home or the heart deeply, but it makes the road less anonymous. A nod means, "I have seen you before." A small allowance of patience means, "I know how your horse steps." A brief question about yesterday's delay means, "Your route exists in my mind." The toll point holds these modest recognitions, and they soften the official nature of the work. There may also be days of poor temper. Rain too long, fees resented, loads late, animals tired, and figures disputed. The weighman cannot make all moods gentle, and we need not pretend every exchange was tender. Warm realism allows for rough edges without letting them dominate. He answers, waits, checks, and writes. The road absorbs the irritation, and the next cart brings a different air. Work continues, which is often how people survive ordinary frictions. A winter day would make the toll house feel smaller. The fire would matter more, the ink would resist, and breath would show near the doorway. Iron would sting through gloves if touched too long. Horses would steam after pulling heavy loads. Drivers' faces would redden in the cold, and words would come shorter, wrapped in scarves and impatience. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman would still stand by the plate, because cold alters the work but does not excuse it. In such weather, the scale might need extra attention. Frost, mud, and slush are all enemies of clean movement. He would clear, test, and watch more closely. His boots might slide slightly near the edge, and his fingers might lose feeling while handling coins. You can feel the relief of stepping back inside, even if the toll house is only partly warm. The little fire becomes a center of the world. A summer day would bring a different burden. Dust would rise from the road and settle on the desk, the ledgers, the window ledge, and the weighman's cuffs. Horses would sweat more freely, and the smell of warm leather would deepen. Loads of produce might ripen in the heat, giving the air sweetness mixed with bruised leaves and tar. The Dublin toll weighman might work with sleeves loosened. Watching that dust did not thicken where the scale needed clean play. Summer light can make a workday seem longer because it refuses to dim when the body is ready. The road keeps offering visibility, and visibility invites more movement. A cart delayed by heat may arrive late, and the weighman's closing tasks may wait again. Yet there is also pleasure in a dry page, a pen that moves easily, and a window not clouded by damp. Every season gives and takes in its own quiet way. Autumn would bring heavy roots, fuel, building materials before harsher weather, and the smell of leaves beginning to decay in roadside corners. The air might hold smoke earlier in the day, and the city would seem to draw supplies inward. The weighman would feel the year turning through the loads before any calendar told him so. Potatoes, coal, timber, and sacks for storage would speak of preparation. You can feel the city making itself ready. Spring would bring lighter mornings and a softness in the air after long damp months. Mud would still be plentiful, but the light would come earlier to the toll house window. Certain produce would change, certain routes might grow busier, and horses might seem more awake in the brighter air. The Dublin toll weighman would not need to celebrate it aloud. He would simply open the door to a different kind of morning. Through all seasons, the ledger remains. Page after page, the hand moves. Some days the entries are many, some days fewer. Some lines are written in hurry, some in quiet gaps, some by lamplight, some under a window bright with cold sun. The ledger is the closest thing the job has to a memory, yet it remembers only what it is built to remember. We supply the rest with careful imagination. There is a soft humility in knowing that most of a life cannot be recovered in full. We do not force the weighman to become a symbol too large for his boots. We let him be a worker with a task, a room, a road, and a set of habits. That is enough. In fact, it may be more restful because it is enough. The mind can settle beside a real task more easily than beside a grand lesson. The toll weighman's hands return again to the center of our attention. They open the ledger, smooth the page, hold the pen, count the coins, signal the driver, brush grit from the plate, and lift the latch at day's end. Hands are where quiet labor becomes visible. You can almost see the skin roughened by weather, the ink near the nail, the small stiffness from cold. The hands do not ask to be admired, but they tell the truth. His ears work too. He listens for the approach of carts, the tone of drivers, the settling of loads, the odd sound of a mechanism not moving freely, the difference between a full cart and an empty one. Listening helps him prepare before the cart is even at the plate. We listen with him now. Wheel, hoof, chain, breath, rain, pen, coin. The world grows calm when its sounds are allowed to arrive one by one. His eyes hold the road. They read posture, load, weather, and figures. They glance from scale to ledger and back again. They notice when a driver is uneasy, when a horse is tired, when a load has shifted, when a page has smudged. This is not the dramatic vision of a lookout on a cliff. It is the practical seeing of a working station, low to the ground and close to mud. It is just as worthy of quiet attention. His voice, when we imagine it, is likely plain. It gives instructions, asks for names or loads, states charges, answers questions, and sometimes offers a small remark about weather or road conditions. It does not need to be lyrical. The lyric is in the pattern around it. A calm voice at a scale can shape the mood of a queue, and the Dublin toll weighman would have learned that a measured tone saves trouble before trouble fully forms. The job's obscurity may also come from class. Working people who handled routine public functions often appeared only briefly in records, and usually through pay, appointment, address, or complaint. Their skill was assumed because the city needed it done. When remembered, they were remembered locally by those who saw them, not by institutions eager to preserve their inner lives. You can feel the quiet unfairness of that, but we keep our tone soft. The remedy here is attention, not noise. Attention brings back the room. The toll house walls are close. The window is clouded at the corners. The desk sits at a practical height. The floorboards or stones are worn by turning feet. The fire, when lit, smells of coal and ash. The lamp, when needed, gives off oil and a wavering glow. The room is not picturesque to itself. It is a place where a man gets through the day. The road brings another cart. Let it be timber this time, because timber has a good sound in evening air. The lengths are strapped tight, but they knock gently as the wheels climb the plate. The cut ends smell fresh under damp, resinous and pale. The driver gives the load's account. The weighman waits, reads, writes, and takes the fee. Then the timber moves on toward a shop front, a repair, a scaffold, a room not yet built. A room not yet built is a pleasant thought for sleep. Boards become floors, beams become support. Shelves hold cups, tables hold bread, doors close against weather. The toll weighman does not follow the wood that far, but we can see the future resting inside the load. His line in the ledger marks one quiet step in that becoming. The city is made of such steps, most of them uncelebrated. Another cart brings barrels, and the air turns cellar cool. Another brings sacks, and the air turns dusty. Another brings empty crates, and the sound turns hollow. The scale receives each one without preference. The weighman, though human, imitates that fairness as well as he can. You can rest in the impartiality of the process. The road may be full of human complication, but for a moment, weight is simply weight. Of course, even weight has context. A heavy load may be legal or excessive, fair or misdeclared, expected or disputed. The weighman's work sits where simple measurement meets human purpose. That is why the role cannot be reduced to a machine, even though the machine is central. Someone must interpret, record, communicate, and stand responsible. The Dublin toll weighman is that someone, quiet at the edge of the city's movement. The longer we stay, the more the title changes in the mind. Toll weighman first sounds obscure, almost dry. Then it begins to smell of rain, leather, ink, coal, flour, and warm tea. It begins to sound like wheels, hooves, coins, pages, and low voices. It begins to feel like cold iron underfoot and a wooden desk beneath the palm. This is how forgotten work returns, not by becoming famous, but by becoming tangible again. A late afternoon lull opens, and the weighman uses it to set the room straight. He brushes crumbs from his meal, wipes a wet patch near the door, checks the ink, and looks at the page totals so far. Outside, the road is briefly empty. The empty scale holds a quiet that is different from unused silence. It is the silence of something ready. You can feel readiness resting in the iron. Readiness is a theme of the job. The weighman must be ready for the next cart, the next question, the next dispute, the next change in weather, and the next small failure of equipment. Yet, this readiness is not anxious in our telling. It is settled. It is the readiness of a person who knows the shape of what may come and has arranged his tools accordingly. That kind of readiness can be deeply calming to imagine. The lull ends with a familiar creak from down the road. The weighman lifts his head. A cart appears through the soft grey air, carrying a load under dark canvas, the ropes drawn tight and wet. The horse's hooves strike the stones slowly. The driver raises a hand. The Dublin toll weighman steps to the plate, and the day resumes its measured breathing, taking in the cart, holding it still, and letting it pass onward after the weight is known. The cart under the dark canvas passes on, and the sound of its wheels thins along the damp road until it becomes only part of Dublin's evening hush. The 1900s Dublin toll weighman remains by the scale for a moment, listening as the horse's steps soften into distance. The iron plate is empty again, shining faintly where rain has polished it. You can smell wet stone, lamp oil, coal smoke, and the last dusty trace of the load that has gone. Inside the toll house, the lamp burns low beside the ledger. The day's final figures rest in their columns, no longer moving from hand to hand, no longer asking to be settled. The weighman closes the book with care, and the sound is soft, like a door within a door. We stay with him as he wipes the pen, gathers the coins, and lets the small room return to order. Outside, the road has lost its daytime insistence. A far wheel turns somewhere beyond sight, but it does not come to the scale. The horses are being unharnessed in yards and stables. The carts stand empty, or covered, or waiting for another morning. The city keeps breathing around the toll point, quieter now, with smoke lifting above roofs and lamplight trembling in wet patches of stone. The weighman steps to the doorway one last time. His hand rests on the frame, rough wood beneath tired fingers, and the cool air touches his face. He has kept his place beside the road, and the road has passed through his keeping. There is nothing grand to announce. There is only the gentle completion of work done carefully enough to disappear into peace. The fire settles into ash. The ledger is closed. The scale lies dark and level in the road. And in the small toll house, with the tools where they belong, the quiet gathers softly, and so do you.